You have thought something you would never say aloud, not as a passing impulse you dismissed immediately, something you sat with, something that told you something about yourself you were not prepared to know. Carl Jung spent his life studying that thought, not the thought itself, the part of you it came from. He called it the shadow. And his conclusion, after 40 years of clinical observation, was this: every human being is capable of evil, not the people in history books, not the ones behind glass in courtrooms, you. The question is not whether you carry this, you do. The question is whether you are willing to look at it. Jung's warning was not about them, it was about you, specifically. Jung did not arrive at this conclusion easily. He had spent years treating patients, educated, moral, self-aware individuals who found themselves capable of impulses that horrified them. Not actions, impulses, thoughts, moments of wanting something they believed themselves incapable of wanting. What Jung concluded was not that these patients were damaged, it was that they were honest enough to notice what everyone else was suppressing: the shadow. Jung's term for the region of the psyche that contains everything we cannot accept about ourselves is not a pathology. It is not the mark of a disordered mind. It is a structural feature of every human psyche without exception. What goes into the shadow is not random. It is everything that was incompatible with the identity we were required to construct, the aggression we were told was wrong, the selfishness we were taught to be ashamed of, the cruelty we felt and immediately disowned, the desire for power we learned to disguise as something more acceptable. We did not eliminate these things. We relocated them. And here is what Jung observed about what happens when we relocate rather than acknowledge. The suppressed material does not become inert. It becomes pressurized. The shadow grows in proportion to how completely we deny it. The more morally certain a person becomes, the more thoroughly they have constructed an identity built on their own goodness, the more dense and dangerous the shadow beneath that identity becomes. This is the part that most people resist. Because the intuition runs in exactly the opposite direction, we assume that moral discipline, the deliberate suppression of dark impulses, makes a person safer. Jung's clinical observation was that it makes them more dangerous. Not despite their goodness, because of it. The person who has never acknowledged their capacity for cruelty has not eliminated it. They have simply never had to face it. They have no map of it, no understanding of its shape or its triggers. When the conditions finally arrive, and Jung believed they always arrive, they are completely unprepared. The people most certain of their own goodness are the ones Jung worried about most. In 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram conducted an experiment that Jung would have recognized immediately. Ordinary people, recruited from the general public, not selected for any particular psychology, were instructed to administer electric shocks to another person as part of what they believed was a learning experiment. The shocks were not real. The distress of the person receiving them was simulated. The participants did not know this. 65% of participants administered what they believed to be the maximum possible shock, labeled on the equipment as potentially fatal. When instructed to do so by an authority figure, they were not sadists, they were not criminals, they were not psychologically abnormal by any standard measure. They were ordinary people placed in specific conditions. This is the first layer. Clinical, documented, seemingly distant from your own life. The second layer is closer. Jung documented the specific conditions under which the shadow breaks through the constructed identity, threat. When survival feels at stake, the moral architecture dissolves faster than we believe possible. Humiliation. When the identity we have built is publicly challenged, the shadow emerges in its defense with a ferocity that surprises us. Moral licensing. When we have done something good, we unconsciously grant ourselves permission to do something that is not. The permission of a crowd. When others around us behave in ways we would never permit ourselves alone, the individual shadow merges into something collective and far less restrained. You have been in some of these conditions. You may have surprised yourself. The third example is the one that requires the most honesty. You have had a thought you would never say aloud. Not a passing impulse you dismissed in under a second. A thought with texture. A thought that showed you something about what you are capable of wanting. Perhaps toward someone who wronged you. Perhaps toward someone you love. Perhaps toward a stranger whose ease in the world provoked something in you that you did not expect. You did not act on it. You may have been genuinely disturbed by it. You filed it under aberration and moved on. Jung would say, that was not an aberration. That was the shadow introducing itself. You have had a thought you would never say aloud. That thought is the shadow announcing itself. Set aside Milgram. Set aside the historical examples. Set aside every case study that has allowed you to locate this framework in someone else. Think about the last time you were genuinely threatened. Not physically, psychologically. The last time someone challenged something you had built your identity around. What arrived first, before the reasoned response, before the measured reaction, was something faster. Something that wanted something you would not say aloud. That was the shadow. Think about the last time you watched someone who had what you wanted, not the surface feeling you acknowledged, the feeling underneath it, the one you rationalized as something more acceptable. Jung's framework asks you to stop rationalizing. The capacity for evil is not located in a special category of person. It is not the product of a damaged childhood, a disordered psychology, an exceptional circumstance. It is the product of being human and having a shadow, which means it is yours. The question Jung asked his patients, and the question that this framework eventually forces, is not whether you are capable. That question has already been answered. The question is, under what conditions? What would need to happen for the thing you carry to break through the identity you have constructed? What specific threat? What specific humiliation? What specific permission? You may have already been in those conditions. You may not have recognized them for what they were at the time. Jung's most uncomfortable clinical observation was about the people who could not answer this question, not because they lacked the intelligence, because they had so thoroughly constructed an identity around their own goodness that there was no space inside it to look. These were, in his clinical experience, the most dangerous people he encountered, not because they were evil, because they were certain they were not. The shadow does not disappear because you refuse to look at it. It accumulates. It waits for the conditions. And when those conditions arrive, it does not announce itself. It simply acts. And you discover, in that moment, something about yourself that you cannot unknow. The only difference between you and the people you cannot understand is the situation you have never been in. Jung's answer was not reassuring. He did not believe that knowing about the shadow made you safe. He did not believe that insight produced immunity. What he believed, and what 40 years of clinical work led him to, was that the person who faces their shadow is marginally less dangerous than the person who does not, marginally. The work he described, individuation, the lifelong process of integrating the shadow rather than suppressing it, is not a solution. It is a practice, an ongoing, never completed confrontation with the parts of yourself that are most resistant to examination. What it produces is not goodness. It produces something rarer and more uncomfortable than goodness. It produces a person who knows what they are capable of, who carries that knowledge without collapsing under it, who can feel the shadow move and recognize it for what it is before it acts. This is not a comfortable place to stand. Jung never suggested it was. The alternative, the continued construction of an identity built on your own goodness, the ongoing suppression of everything that challenges that identity, is what he considered the genuinely dangerous position. Not because bad people take it, because good people do. The most catastrophic expressions of human evil throughout history have not come from people who believed themselves monsters. They have come from people who believed themselves righteous, who had suppressed their shadow so completely that when it finally broke through the constructed identity, it did so with the full force of everything that had been compressed into it. And they called it justice. You are not those people, but you carry what they carried, in a different measure, under different conditions, in a shadow shaped by your specific history. Jung's darkest warning was not that evil exists in the world, it was that it exists in you, and the only thing standing between you and it is a level of self-knowledge most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. But knowing you are capable is only the first question. The harder one is what you do with the things you love, and why. When you are closest to them, the shadow reaches for them first. Jung called it the urge to destroy what we cannot bear to lose, the pattern that turns the people who matter most into the ones who receive the worst of what we carry. Why you destroy what you love, that is next.